An 18-year-old woman in Toledo, Ohio, decided to surprise her fiancé after his shift one night and share a romantic stroll home. Along the way, they encountered a man who approached them from across the street, and Cheryl Phan immediately knew they were in danger. They offered their valuables, but the man wanted more. He forced Cheryl and her fiancé to cover their faces with masks and led them to a garage. Another man appeared, and together, they took turns violating Cheryl as her fiancé looked on helplessly. When they were done, they forced her fiancé to hold her and shot her in the back. Another trigger pull, and a click. The attackers had run out of bullets, and they took off into the night, leaving Cheryl bleeding but alive. She knew the only reason she and her fiancé survived is because the chamber was empty, but what she didn't know is that she was one of the many victims of 2 serial-killing brothers, and one of the few who survived. On this episode, we will cover the chilling story of Anthony and Nathaniel Cook, 2 brothers bonded by blood and by bloodshed. Brothers Anthony and Nathaniel Cook were responsible for a series of murders in northwestern Ohio that spanned nearly a decade. Their joint spree kicked off in 1980, and the pair committed a series of heinous crimes which included kidnapping, assault, rape, and murder. This was nothing new for Anthony, who had a long history of violent crime spanning back to his teenage years. Nathaniel, on the other hand, had only received traffic violations until he fell under the influence of his older brother. Fingerprints led to Anthony's capture in 1981, but Nathaniel would remain free until the late 90s, when DNA evidence collected from an unrelated arrest linked him to the previous murders. Who were the Cook brothers, and why did they embark on such a dark journey together? Today, let's unravel that mystery. Anthony Cook was born in Mobile, Alabama in March of 1949. He was the 3rd child of the family, but certainly not the last. After relocating to Ohio, his parents had 6 more children, including his younger brother Nathaniel Cook, who was born in 1958. A year later, the parents divorced, and hard times forced the older children to take on part-time work to help support the family. Problems for Anthony started early. In his teenage years, he was quite the delinquent, performing poorly in school, stealing purses, and once inappropriately touching a girl in his neighborhood. The old saying goes that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and in this case, that tree might have been Anthony's older brother, 𝖕s, who was convicted on rape charges in 1965 and sentenced to prison time of up to 25 years. This only escalated Anthony's bad behavior. A few years later, he himself was arrested for robbing someone walking down the street. This landed Anthony in a mental institution, where he was diagnosed as suffering from early onset schizophrenia. Barely a week after being released, Anthony was right back in custody for assault and robbery of a 61-year-old woman. This time, the judge sentenced him to 10 to 20 years in prison. With such a large age gap and multiple stints in prison, Anthony wasn't home much when Nathaniel was growing up. In the early 1970s, their family briefly moved to Southern California, but returned to Ohio after only 3 years. Nathaniel wasn't a troublemaker, but he struggled making friends and dropped out before finishing high school. Despite academic and social issues, Nathaniel had no criminal record whatsoever, save for a few minor traffic violations. Nathaniel's record stayed clean into adulthood, but that would quickly change when his big brother came back into his life. Anthony received parole in 1973, only a few years into his sentence. Less than 6 months had passed, and he was already on the hunt for trouble. On December 20th, Toledo was experiencing a snowstorm, and Anthony went out for a late-night drive. What kind of person goes for a drive at night in the middle of a snowstorm? Perhaps it's the kind of person looking to prey upon people caught in bad weather, who may be more readily accepting of a free ride. Sure enough, just before 2 a.m., Anthony picked up 21-year-old Vicky Lynn Small. Vicky asked for a ride to her nearby apartment, but instead, Anthony took her to a park in central Toledo. There, he physically and sexually assaulted Vicky before shooting her 6 times with his pistol. He dumped her body behind a golf club, hoping the location and snow might conceal his crimes. It only took 4 hours for her body to be found. Police grossly mishandled the case, failing to take possession of her vehicle or restrict access to her apartment, leading to even further confusion in the investigation. Bullets were recovered from the scene, but there was no other evidence that might lead authorities to her killer. The following year, Anthony was arrested again, this time for robbing 2 people at gunpoint. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and he received parole in 1979. He started working and even got married, but Anthony was not turning his life around. In fact, he was about to turn someone else's life around in the worst way. His brother, Nathaniel. Anthony decided to reconnect with Nathaniel, and the younger brother, who had always struggled to make connections, accepted the offer of rekindling their relationship. This was a huge mistake, because the only place Nathaniel's big brother planned to take him was down a long, dark, and twisted path. In May 1980, Anthony and Nathaniel Cook attacked 24-year-old Thomas Gordon and his 18-year-old girlfriend in North Toledo. The brothers forcibly took control of the couple's car at gunpoint, then drove them to a wooded area on the outskirts of the county. They shot and killed Thomas, his girlfriend, then stabbed her and fled the scene. She survived the attack, and she would become one of the first victims of the Cook brothers, and one of the few survivors. The brothers struck again on January 3, 1981. 19-year-old Connie Sue Thompson was hitchhiking around Toledo and accepted a ride from the Cook brothers. They repeated the MO seen in their last attack, driving Connie to the outskirts of town and raping her. This time, they took things a step further. They murdered Connie and dumped her body off a bridge. They were clearly escalating, and this was only the beginning. A few weeks later, on January 27th, 18-year-old 𝖕𝖊𝖉𝖎𝖆 had surprised her fiancé, 22-year-old Bud Coates, at the end of his shift at the local supermarket. The couple began their walk home together, but their romantic stroll was interrupted by Anthony Cook approaching them with a gun. They handed over their valuables, but Cheryl knew this man was no ordinary robber. Anthony ordered them to cover their faces with ski masks and led them down a dark alleyway to a garage. Nathaniel appeared, and once inside the garage, they took turns raping Cheryl while Bud was forced to look on in horror. When they were finished, they ordered Bud to hold Cheryl as they shot her in the back. As Bud prepared for the next shot, they heard a click. The Cook brothers had run out of bullets. When they realized they were out of ammunition, the brothers ran, leaving Bud and Cheryl behind. Though Cheryl was badly injured, she survived, and she knew that their lives were only spared because there were no more bullets in the chamber. The joint spree ended in February after Anthony coerced 12-year-old Dawn Renee Bax into his car. Nathaniel arrived after the abduction, and they transported Dawn to an abandoned theater where they tortured and sexually assaulted her for hours. This time, they chose to kill their victim not with a knife or a gun, but by brutally crushing her skull using a brick block. Perhaps the brutality of this attack or the age of the victim weighed on what was left of Nathaniel's conscience, because after this, he stopped participating in the spree altogether. Anthony went on to commit 3 more attacks on his own. The first occurred on March 27th, when Anthony abducted a 21-year-old couple, Scott Moulton and Denise 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎𝑑. He raped Denise, then shot and killed both of them. On August 2nd, Anthony ambushed another pair of 21-year-olds, 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎𝑑 and Daryl Cole. The couple was returning from a night out with family when Anthony attacked them, raped Stacy, bludgeoned them to death with a baseball bat found in Stacy's car, and stuffed their bodies in the trunk. The final attack came in September of 1981. Anthony ambushed 20-year-old Leslie Sawicki and 21-year-old Todd Sabo, who were sitting in a parked van. Anthony attempted to rape Leslie, but she managed to flee and call the police. After alerting the authorities, Leslie called her father, Peter Sawicki, a well-known businessman in the Toledo area. Peter arrived before the police, and upon his arrival at the scene, Anthony promptly shot and killed him. This time, Anthony was sloppy. He left fingerprints behind, which police were able to use to identify him. The murder of Peter Sawicki drew plenty of attention, and thanks to the help of informants, they were able to track down and arrest Anthony Cook on October 14th. Given the lack of physical evidence from the other attacks, authorities were only able to charge Anthony with the murder of Peter Sawicki, and for this he was given a life sentence in 1982. After parting ways with his brother, Nathaniel had ceased involvement in any kind of violent crime. He was arrested for a few lesser offenses, and thanks to one of these arrests in the mid-1990s, police obtained a DNA sample. With DNA technology emerging at the time, authorities ran Nathaniel's DNA through their database and returned a match to samples taken at the scene of their first murder in 1980. On February 13, 1998, Nathaniel was arrested and convicted for this first attack. In 2000, the Cook brothers were offered a plea deal. If they confessed to the murder of Thomas Gordon and their other murders, they would not be charged for the additional murders. Nathaniel admitted to murdering Thomas Gordon, and he also admitted to being an accomplice in the murders of Connie Thompson and Don Bax. Anthony pled guilty to the murder of Thomas Gordon and 8 additional murders, including the murder of Vicki Lynn Small in 1973, which police had no idea was connected to him. Nathaniel was sentenced to 75 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, and Anthony was given an additional life sentence on top of the one he was already serving. Anthony attempted to file for parole in 2015 at the age of 65, and his motion was denied by Ohio's parole board. Anthony was eligible to submit another motion as of 2024, and in 2025 his request was denied again. He is ineligible to file again until 2034, but the likelihood of him ever receiving parole is slim. Toledo PD Detective Frank Stiles, who had helped track down Anthony and interviewed him after his arrest, strongly opposes Anthony Cook ever being released, citing his strong belief that he will immediately kill again. Following an interview with Anthony after his arrest, Detective Stiles said, "He is the worst human being I've ever seen, talked to, known, or investigated. He's the worst." Nathaniel Cook applied for parole in 2018, and although presiding judge Linda Jennings was against releasing him, there was no legal basis to keep him imprisoned. Despite outrage from the public, Nathaniel Cook was released on parole on August 10, 2018, at the age of 59. He was released under very strict and specific provisions, which included a GPS tracking monitor and mandatory registration of his address every 90 days. Nathaniel Cook was the first serial killer in Ohio's history to ever be granted parole. Anthony Cook proved from a young age that he is a deeply disturbed and violent individual. He turned his own little brother into a monster like him, but Nathaniel seemed to retain more of his humanity, stopping his involvement and turning away from a life of violence and evil. Was Nathaniel Cook also violent at heart, or was Anthony's influence so vile and so corrupting that it pushed Nathaniel to become something he might otherwise never have been? We might never know the answers, but the story of Anthony and Nathaniel Cook remains as one of the most harrowing serial killer cases in Ohio's history, and this story shall remain as yet another tale from the underworld.
If you enjoyed this true crime story, don't forget to like and subscribe and let us know what you think in the comments. Want to watch another chilling tale from the underworld? Check out these other videos on screen.